So Richard, with those changes what we made, doesn't it, it's sort of, as Jim said, it sort of does qualify?
Well, by putting preferred, a degree wouldn't be required as an applicant. Again, I mean, I think the point is that
Obviously,
we hire the
if-
best
if-
qualified
Obviously,
candidate.
if somebody has a degree and another one doesn't, they have like experiences, you could, you know, the person with a degree is going to get preference, hopefully.
Okay, is there any more discussion on the item? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The chair votes aye, so the motion passes with 4-1. Okay, let's move on to our 10 a.m. Item D2, planning and building construction project.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Maury Anderson, Planning and Building Services. I went and sat down and so essentially what you have before you is we've had a request by the Susanville Indian Rancheria to conduct inspection services and plan check services for some proposed residences that they're going to be constructing on site. We don't have jurisdiction on these lands, but we have met with them, and in the past, I guess, we have provided some services for them. The correct thing to do would be to have a memorandum of understanding between the Rancheria and the county to conduct those services. We've met with them. I think we're all on the same page, and I think it would be a shot in the arm for our department. It'd be a good thing. We want a little direction from the board to, before we spend time drafting those up, that the board agrees that that's the direction that we want to go. We think it would be good for the department and help the Rancheria, so we're recommending that you give us direction to go draft that MOU.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions?
What's the liability issues on this for us?
Well, that's why we're going to draft the MOU,
Yeah.
and that's why Red
That's
and
definitely
Kind
gonna
will
be
be
addressed.
looking it over closely.
Okay. Any more questions from the board?
The reason why, I mean, why are we doing this? Because of the Rancheria is on its own sovereign nation or something, and that's kind of why we're doing this?
They don't necessarily have the ability to conduct these kind of inspections. They could hire them out, they could do a lot of things, but typically in the past, when they've had issues and problems, they've turned to us or the city, and we have the staff to help them out, and I think it'd be a win-win.
But do they have to come in and get building permits? and
Yeah,
all
they
that
would go
stuff?
through, and by the way, Ms. Japs from the Rancheria is here and can answer some of those questions, but they want to construct these buildings to current codes. And there's the aptitude and ability to do it here through us, and we would treat it like any other building permit. And there's a few things to work out, such as the sprinkler requirements, which we go through the city because they have the expertise there. So that's things that we're going to work out. Those are things that we're going to work out through the MOU, but they just don't have the expertise to do it.
But they have several choices. They can hire a private, person to be their own in-house building inspector, or they can contract with a private sector to provide that service, or they can contract with us or contract with the city. They could contract with, the city of Reading and have.
They could
their
do a
building-
lot. There's a million different ways to skin a cat.
But I think their preference is to deal with the local, so, I think it has benefits for both.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, and my take on it too is, I appreciate the opportunity, I appreciate, the business for the county, and then it certainly makes perfect sense, and I think,
Single-family residents are few and far between since the sprinkler requirements, so
Yeah.
we look eagerly to make this happen.
exactly, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. Okay, thank you, Mike. Is there any, one from the public that would like to comment? Ms. Manor?
I'm Chandra Jabs, I'm the grants writer for the Susanville Indian Rancheria. I just want to say thank you for considering this MOU. I think this will be a great partnership between the two governmental entities. We're currently building homes up there as we speak, and this, we received a grant from ICBG to build 5 new homes. And then the plan is to come back again and apply for another 5 homes. There's 16 lots up there total, so there's opportunity for continual development up there. And this will lay kind of the groundwork for some future partnerships in this regard. We want our homes to be built according to code, and you guys already provide those services. So it's just a great partnership in a local small jurisdiction. So,
Well, thank you.
if you have any questions, let me know.
Can I get your name again?
Chandra Jazz.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one question on this overhead sprinkler system. I mean, how much has that inhibited or slowed you guys' progress down as far as going forward?
It's been slowing us down. We just recently got our plans updated to include the sprinkler systems. In the grant application, we wrote to have the plans up to the 2010 codes. With the recent approval of the 2013, we're looking to have our plans updated to that to make sure that the homes are built according to current code.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, thanks. Anyone else like to comment on this? Okay, if not, we'll bring it back to the board, and the action requested is to give directions to staff to start an MOU.
I would make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second it.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to move forward with the MOU. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Passes. Thank you again for the opportunity and bringing that forward. Thank you. All right, let's quickly move forward to item H2, the appointment of treasurer tax collector to fill the vacancy with Richard Egan.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my assumption of county executive officer duties has made the appointment of a new treasurer tax collector to fill out my term necessary. As the board's aware, when I was serving as in an interim capacity as county administrative officer, you adopted an emergency resolution that allowed me to hold both offices for a short period of time. That period of time by statute is limited to 6 months. And we began that December, I believe December 10th or 17th, so that would put it through June 17th. Obviously, I would like the board to appoint a treasurer to fill the position, because I don't want Jean to actually catch me sleeping.
I'm sorry.
She might get a real photo if I continue to do it. But having said that, there are 4 people now that I believe are running for the office, and it may be awkward for the board to appoint someone. In the past, I know the board's been reluctant to appoint people who have been in the race during a contested race. And I'm just kind of throwing it out there. If it serves the board, I'd be happy to consider continuing for the 6 months, which would get past the primary. It doesn't solve the problem. In all likelihood, with 4 people in the race, this election would go to the general election in November with the top two. So the board would have to make a decision at least by then. There may be other individuals on county staff that could fill that position. The issue becomes, it puts them in a little bit of jeopardy if an employee takes an appointment as treasurer tax collector, they then become an elected official, and when the term ends, they're out of a job. They don't retain the rights to go back to their job. But if I have a few ideas of employees that may consider that. If the board would like me to explore that, I'd be happy to. But I just wanted to throw throw it out and have the board address the issue in open session and have the discussion.
How's the department running now?
It's running well. Things are very busy. We've got a tax sale coming up in May. We've got actually the installment date in April 10th. And so we're entering a fairly busy time of year. Things are functioning. I personally want to really focus on the administrative offices, and I can continue to do this for a couple more months if we need to do that, but I think the board should just kind of weigh the fact that there's only so much time in the day.
Are you short-staffed in there with you not being in there?
Yes.
So, Richard, to make sure I understood this right, so if you have an employee in your office right now, and that employee takes out papers to run for treasurer tax collector, and we appoint that employee to be the interim head, and then somebody else on the outside wins that seat, that employee is then out of a job, she can't go back to a regular job, is what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, not to say that a person couldn't reapply, but it's kind of a one-way trip. When you get elected, you become an elected official and you lose your rights to your prior position. Not to say that an individual couldn't reapply for an opening, but they wouldn't have the rights to that position.
And with that, Richard, why would somebody apply for it, to be appointed, knowing that at the end of the year,
They're done.
they're done? Is it gonna be hard to get anybody to apply for it?
Well, there are a couple reasons that people may want to do that. First, retirement. If they feel comfortable. A couple of the individuals, or one of the individuals that I'm thinking about, I just don't want to raise the name unless you're real serious about it. We could structure a situation where their position remains open, where the position's not filled. And then if they wanted to go back, there is a provision in the personnel policy that allows the county, doesn't obligate the county, but allows the county to put someone back in a position without recruiting for it, essentially. If they're gone for less than a year, you can put them back in. So if the position was left vacant, that would make that easier.
You mean technically you leave your old position vacant, but somebody else does the work?
Well, just say, for example, we find somebody on staff that the board wants to appoint as treasurer tax collector, and they do that. So that person's position that they would be vacating would be left open for a year, and then at the end of the term, in December, that position would be open to go back into. We could look at that.
What about just leaving your old position vacant, but having somebody else do the work without changing their whole designation?
Without doing the legal research, my understanding is that somebody needs to actually be the treasurer tax collector to perform the duties that are prescribed in the government code, the reporting and signing deeds and that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
When you're elected to the office like you are, to that office, you serve until your successor is qualified, and even if that goes beyond a pre-designated term. So your term expires, but if there's a dispute or whatever, and the person who's supposed to replace you doesn't get qualified to replace you continue to serve, so there's always an incumbent in the office. Now, when the board passed the resolution in December, it was as an interim thing because you're an interim CEO. With the contract that the board negotiated with you a couple of weeks ago that went into effect as of yesterday, it's not a temporary situation anymore, it's now a permanent situation. So I raised the question, maybe council could answer, does that mean that just by the effective date of that contract, removes that temporary arrangement that was envisioned by the law for that 6-month period of time? So it's not a question of do we or don't we? And in that being the case, and you're technically no longer serving as the treasurer, tax collector, then the assistant in whatever the office may be, until a successor is appointed or designated, basically functions in the capacity of the person who is there. So the assistant in your office, by just nature, would become the de facto interim treasurer, tax collector, until the board takes an action or until the voters take action and select somebody. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're an elected official. They're actually functioning in that role because of just their unique position. That's why you have deputies in all the various offices. That's why you have an undersheriff or a sheriff. If something happened to the sheriff, and the undersheriff assumes that responsibility until the board could convene and we could determine what would be the, and it could be, that interim could be several weeks, it could be stretched out to several months.
That sounds logical, we just haven't found that supported in the code.
Our code and ordinances are silent to the assistant position. But you all have the opportunity to appoint someone in that role. But you're right, Mr. Egan is now your CAO as of yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, he's full-time as of yesterday. So, does that, how does that affect the resolution and the temporary language that, the law allows you to have by taking that action? Mr. Crabtree was the one that sorted that out a couple of years ago, when Mr. Egan served as an interim for a brief period of time and had both hats. He didn't fall asleep then, but obviously, I don't know if he was fell asleep.
But
he
you
was,
saw.
He was covertly working under the table with his phone.
With his phone.
Is how I interpreted it, so which is considered a no-no. But
But
anyway,
the contract trumps, because now we have a contract in
Right.
place that both parties have entered into, that he is now the CAO.
so the question is, does the law allow us to have somebody who's got a permanent contract to be able to function in interim? And my impression from what Mr. Crabtree indicated is, back then, I think he even went so far as to say that if Mr. Egan was to remain and become the permanent CAO, at that point in time, he would have to vacate the office of treasurer, which would then necessitate an appointment at some point. But that takes time, because you have to go through a process to make the appointment. So from the point the vacancy exists until the point the appointment is made, there's an interim period there. And it's in that context, I think, the code, if you search the government code well enough, I think you'll find that whoever is the lead assistant that's been designated in whatever that department is, assumes the responsibility during that interim time period, so you don't have a break of somebody not being able to sign a document or transact business, because the office has to continue regardless if the body's there or not, unless you wiped out the whole office, and then at that point, it may be, an emergency session and the chairman of the board can make an appointment or something.
And that sounds good. If we're unable to find government code to support that, it may be most expeditious for the board to take that action.
Yeah, and we actually were searching yesterday in our own ordinances and personnel rules. We didn't go to the government code.
I think you should search the government code, because I think you'll find there's provisions in there. The only place where there's, at least at the county level that I'm aware of, is if there's a vacancy on the board of supervisors and the governor is responsible for making the appointments to fill it. So you may go several months where you have a vacancy. But it only becomes a problem if you have 3 vacancies at any given time, because you have 4 that can back up. That's not the case of the various operational departments, whether it's the sheriff, the DA, the treasurer, the clerk, the assessor, those offices. You have one person who is there, so when that vacancy exists, then until an appointment is made, the deputy immediately under them, takes on as the acting role.
Richard, do we have to fill the vacancy?
I believe so. Because there are a lot of official acts that need to occur, and someone needs to.
But if we choose not to make an appointment, and we allow the assistant to function in the acting capacity, it doesn't change their employment status of being an appointed individual versus an elected individual. And so therefore, when the election is held, You know, it doesn't create the situation where that person may be out in the cold altogether because they did not assume the elected job. They just served as an acting, just as you were acting CAO for 2 months.
I agree with you, we just haven't found the authority in the
That's
code to do
what I,
that.
that's what I,
Okay.
what I said.
Well, I would suggest council research that, because I think you'll find in the government code there is gotta be language that addresses that situation. And I would say this is not the first time a board of supervisors in a county in the state has encountered this situation.
I think, we should move on. It's obvious that we don't have all the information. I think, we're still gathering. It was nice
Well,
for the
and if
discussion.
that's the direction the board, if that's the,
Yeah, I think
we'll
we need
focus
to
on that.
try to get some more answers to what's the questions raised, and then just, have this on our next meeting's agenda again.
okay, we'll re-agendize it.
For next week?
Would it be appropriate for us today to, I don't know, to make a motion or something to have the assistant, be in charge until you guys get this researched out, so you have somebody to sign the papers, because you're,
I'd be reluctant to do that without finding the authority to do it, yeah.
So we're just gonna
Let's make sure
pretend that you're still,
legality's
we're gonna
right.
pretend you're still the treasurer, even though you're permanent, full-time.
Yeah, but my belief now is that the
Got it now.
emergency, oh, go ahead.
I found a vacancy for this county treasurer, and it doesn't speak specific to our situation, but it's only 2 statutes that address it. I don't think we are gonna base this on official misconduct of Mr. Egan, are we? Because that's one, and the other one is the death.
Prefer misconduct.
You pick A or B. That's the only 2 that talk to the vacancy in the government code. But either one, it says the board may appoint some person, it just says some person to fill the vacancy who shall qualify and give bond as the board determines. And again, the second one is, it just speaks to the board shall, may appoint someone to fill the vacancy. It doesn't speak to.
You might wanna search, just not be site-specific to treasurer tax collector, but to fill a vacancy of a constitutional officer.
Yeah, this is specific to county treasurer vacancies, so I did go to that one, but there could be more to see, absolutely.
Yeah.
May.
And you might consider the precedents at the state level, because we've had on occasion state constitutional officers, which are equivalent to county constitutional officers, so you have a
The
state
treasurer's not a
treasurer.
county, not a constitutional officer.
The state treasurer isn't?
No,
I'm talking about
state
state treasurer, okay,
County.
is considered to be, the county level is at the county level, but the state level, they have the state constitution. They're comparable positions. But when there's a vacancy I know when Jess Unruh died in the mid-80s as the state treasurer, until the governor went through the motion to appoint and the legislature had to confirm the appointment, there was probably a 2-month period of time. The chief deputy state treasurer, who was a non-elected person, acted as the state treasurer and conducted business. Betty Yee, who's on the State Board of Equalization now, found herself functioning as a State Board of Equalization member when she was the chief of staff, or whoever the lady was that was the member, and she resigned or ran for another office. And so at the state level, usually the chief deputy or whoever the lead assistant is will function as the acting and interim until such a time as an appointment is made. So that's the code section you need to find, because I think that would give you guidance as to how that applies. But I'm pretty certain that you'll find that it would apply to all of our county offices.
We'll bring it back next week.
What about CSAC? Have you checked? Do they have any?
We actually just started looking into this yesterday and started with our local ordinances.
Yeah.
That's as far as time
I
allows.
think they would be a good reference point.
Yeah, there's,
Yeah.
you're right, there's many agencies that we can bounce this off of.
Okay. All right.
Can I
Yeah.
address
come
the
on.
board? I just want to say, because,
Just say your name for the record.
Nancy Cardenas, Assistant Treasurer Tax Collector. As Richard has been doing this interim, I have been keeping the office going, and I believe I have been doing a really good job of keeping the office going. And you guys have had his attention pretty much for the last, 6 months to 8 months. So I just want to bring that up when you're talking about that. It's not as if our office isn't functioning. It's not as if 65 properties aren't going to go to tax sale in May. It's not as if we're not going to collect another $10 million in second installment property taxes. I'm doing that, and I believe I'm doing that well. So I'm a little leery about taking the appointment, but Jim's idea of doing the interim, I do believe that I hold the qualifications, that I can keep the office going if that comes about, to be able to do it as an interim position. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move off this item now. I think there's been clear direction. So we're gonna recess for 5 minutes and we'll come back with our 10:30 time certain.